Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Dan Blanchard from the Travel in Time with Dan show, where we mix travel with history, with leadership, and of course, with me, Dan Blanchard. Today, I am in Bar Harbor, Maine. Right? It used to be called the old Mount Desert Island, the Eden of the East. But back in 1918, somebody saw like a sandbar during low tide, and they changed the name here to Bar Harbor in 1918 here in Maine. Now, in the mid 1800s, this place used to be a very humble fishing village. A bunch of maybe fishing shacks were around here, but that's going to change, right? You get the fishing, you get the farming, you got the shipbuilding. All that stuff's going to eventually change, and I'll show you what it becomes today. All right? In 1604, Seigneur de Champlain was here, right? And of course, the French and the English, fought over this area. Of course, they fought over this area, right? But what's going to happen is this is going to change, and it's going to become part of the Gilded Age. Bar Harbor, Maine is actually going to have a rivalry, right, with Newport, Rhode Island. And in some ways, they're even going to pass out Newport, Rhode Island. You know, Newport, Rhode Island, the Great Gatsby. You know how that is, right? Kind of like new money, a little stuffy was like their reputation. But here in Bar Harbor, it was a little bit different. It was like the old intellectual wealth, the outdoor vigor, right? All that stuff. So Bar Harbor, what they were known for was like the rusticators, right? Working with the wilderness, the cottage culture was here. Although their cottages were not little. Their cottages were huge, right? But still, they called them cottages, right? They used materials for building these huge cottages to kind of blend into the wilderness, on the rocky coastline here, and they called them cottages. But again, they were huge, right? There was nothing small or cottagey about those small cottagers. Now, when you come here, you're looking at what used to be, the playground for the rich and the famous, but you had old money here. You had an intellectual wealth here. People like Joe Pulitzer, the newspaper magnate, the media guy. So he's here for your intellectual wealth. You had the robber barons here, the captains of industry, the Vanderbilts, the Fords, the Rockefellers. Now, John D. Rockefeller, he had a really big influence here. He created a whole bunch of 40 miles or something like that of carriage roads. So those were roads that cars were not allowed to be on. Sorry, Ford, right? But cars were not allowed to be on that. Hopefully Ford didn't have a problem with that when he was down here hanging out with Rockefeller. But this really was the playground, the rich and famous. But then in 1947, you have the Great Fire. 1947, and it's gonna basically rip right through Millionaire's Row, destroying 67 of the mansions that are there on Millionaire's Row. We're talking about grand 50-room estates, right? We're talking this is Gilded Age stuff. This is all gonna be wiped out by the 1947 fire that happens here. However, not all of them are wiped out. Some of the houses are actually, or the mansions, are actually preserved, right? And that's called Harbor Lane, the Eden Street Historic District. You still got a few of them that are hanging around that survived the fire, and they're basically old remnants of the Gilded Age here in Bar Harbor. You also got a thing that's called Acadia National Park, which is right down the road from here. It was donated by the cottagers, the people that wanted to be isolated and left alone. They donated Acadia National Park, and this place actually got turned into a tourism place, a tourism site, kind of the opposite of what the captains of industry or the robber barons wanted. But that's how it goes. That's what happened. I mean, the economic changes here. It was a humble fishing shacks, then it turned into a pretty successful fishing village, then it turned into an elite resort here for the rich and famous, and now it's basically a tourist economy here. So whenever I do these travel in time with Dan shows, where I mix travel with history, with leadership, I like to combine travel and history and leadership. If you have not traveled down here to Bar Harbor, Acadia National Park, you are definitely missing out. You got to travel down here and check this place out. You'll love it down here. It's so cool. The history I've kind of already shared. some of the history with you, but the leadership, what's the leadership lesson here? The leadership lesson here is resilience builds legacy. This place just kept changing. It was resilient. Even a big fire couldn't destroy this place. It might have destroyed all those mansions, but it didn't destroy this place. So resilience builds legacy. That is the leadership lesson here. Well, thank you for the time that you spent with me today on the Travel and Time with Dan show, where we mix travel with history and with leadership, and of course with me, Dan Blanchard. I will be back again real soon for another episode and another amazing place. Take care now.